The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence, in the form of mild nuclear radiation, had already reached beyond the Soviet borders.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at some of the biggest bonehead moves ever made by people.
Franz Ferdinand had wanted to prevent war. Now his death would lead to one.
Not locking the Kerkorpota Gate. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, reached its peak in the 6th century. More than a millennium of war, politics, and plague led to the empire's slow decline. By 1453, it barely extended beyond its capital, Constantinople. But even on the brink, its famed walls were nearly impenetrable. Impenetrable, that is, until someone quite literally forgot to lock the back door. During the final Ottoman siege in 1453, a small service gate known as the Kerkoporta was left open. Ottoman troops discovered it, slipped through, and opened the main gates from the inside. That single mistake spelled the end of Byzantium and handed Constantinople to Mehmed the Conqueror. The Battle of Karan Sebesh. If the 18th century Austro-Hungarian army had a motto, it might have been fight hard, play hard. Cut to 1788, on a sleepy night in the town of Karan Sebesh. Hussar scouts from the Austrian army were searching for the Turkish position. Failing to find the enemy, they requisitioned some local schnapps. Regular troopers soon joined in. Before the night was out, the entire army was drunk. Then, the fights began. Fistfights turned into gunfights. In the chaos, someone shouted Turks. The army went to war with itself. Allied soldiers from different nations shouted in their native languages. German officers ordered halt. Non-Germans thought it was Turkish. Artillery was called in. As survivors sobered up, they realized they had utterly defeated themselves. Blockbuster doesn't buy Netflix. In its early years, Netflix was a fly-by-night DVD by mail service.
It's $20 a month, and there's no late fees at all. You get to rent as many as you want.
The DVDs are sent through the U.S. mail. When you return the disc, they'll send you the next movie of your choice from 12,000 titles on their website.
The idea hadn't quite caught on, and they were losing money fast. Prepared to surrender, co-founders Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph offered their company up to Blockbuster. They took a meeting, hat in hand, all but begging for a $50 million buyout. The Blockbuster execs didn't even give them the time of day. Before the next decade was out, Blockbuster would go bankrupt, with all but a handful of stores shuttering.
When Blockbuster originally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy about 6 months ago, it said it would keep all 3,300 stores open, but tonight, as you can see at this Easttown store, it just could not survive.
Netflix, on the other hand, would go on to trailblaze digital streaming. Their platform would transform film and television forever. Today, the big red N is worth north of $150 billion. The Soviet Afghan War. Christmas 1979 was especially bleak for Afghanistan. Its communist government was collapsing, and the Soviet Union invaded to prop it up.
And here's the old guard. Ustinov, Minister of Defense, Andropov, head of the KGB, and Gromyko, Minister of Foreign Affairs. It was their decision, and theirs alone, to commit the Red Army to this disastrous enterprise.
They anticipated a swift victory. After all, they were an advanced military fighting disorganized guerrillas. They were wrong. The Mujahideen put up a ferocious resistance, aided in secret by supplies and support from the US. The war was often compared to Vietnam, dragging on for a decade. The Russians poured far too many rubles into the fight, severely weakening their economy. It played no small role in the eventual Soviet collapse. Americans only had a decade or so to celebrate. As the millennium turned, the same Afghan fighters they once supported and abandoned would eventually morph into the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
And today, the never-ending conflicts still continue in Afghanistan, a land known since time immemorial as the graveyard of empires. It was the war that changed the world, and was the starting point for yet another war.
The Overruled Yamamoto War Game. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor decimated the American Navy.
The base was attacked by 350 Imperial Japanese aircrafts. Though the raid only lasted 75 minutes, the Japanese destroyed or damaged nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and more than 340 airplanes.
But the Americans were only down, not out. Their forces and industry remained strong. To secure victory, Japan launched Operation MI, aiming to lure US carriers into a trap at Midway. Before the battle, Japanese officers ran a war game simulating the attack. It didn't go well. 2 carriers were sunk in the opening minutes. Admiral Ugaki overruled the umpire. Americans wouldn't be so bold, he said, and Japanese defenses would hold. The scenario was rewritten to favor Japan. Real life didn't cooperate. At Midway, U.S. forces struck with speed and surprise, sinking 4 Japanese carriers in a single day.
In just 6 minutes, 4 of the same Japanese aircraft carriers used in the Pearl Harbor attack are destroyed. And over 3,000 Japanese soldiers are killed.
The simulation had it right. Lost Bitcoin. In 2009, James Howells was a computer geek who had a radical idea. This new, nerdy internet monopoly money Bitcoin may just be the currency of the future. He devoted his off hours to it, mining 8,000 Bitcoin. Years later, during a casual house cleanup, he accidentally tossed the hard drive storing it all.
When did the penny drop that actually what you'd thrown away was worth a fortune?
When I started to hear stories of, the Silk Road shut down, and obviously other individuals making their profits and their millions, the penny dropped then.
Fast forward to Bitcoin's boom. His accidental trash run had cost Howells hundreds of millions of dollars. Realizing his mistake, Howells begged his city to let him dig through the Newport landfill. He's offered robots, millions in funding, and a full excavation plan.
They've always told me that the funding to search for this project is there, but not until we get the okay from Newport City Council.
To this day, the city has never agreed. So while crypto bros shout hodl, Howells holds nothing but a lifetime's worth of regret. The traitor Secretary of War. He swore an oath to protect and defend the United States. Instead, by the end of his term, he had armed its enemies. John B. Floyd was appointed Secretary of War by President Buchanan. There, he quickly shifted weapons, ammo, and supplies to southern strongholds. On paper, it looked like routine logistics. In reality, he was stockpiling a Confederate arsenal before there was even a Confederacy. When war finally erupted, the South was suspiciously ready for battle. Accused of corruption and treason, Floyd fled Washington before justice could catch him. Floyd would go on to join the rebellion as a Confederate general. Although some question whether his actions were indeed irregular in context, they helped fuel one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history, the Great Fire of London. Nothing good ever happens on Pudding Lane. In 1666, a bakery on this storied street in London caught fire, but the occupants abandoned the scene and neighboring residents failed to effectively tame the flames.
We now believe the most likely cause of the Great Fire was a stray ember which ignited a pile of twigs stored in the bakehouse. Unnoticed, it started to take hold.
This resulted in a widespread blaze across the city, extending beyond the Roman city wall to the west, leading to major long-term issues for the region. The fire could have been contained more quickly had the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, acted more hastily in deciding to demolish the homes adjacent to the bakery. But alas, the damage had already been done.
He could have pulled down private houses, created a fire break, but those houses belonged to rich merchants who'd put him in power, and he didn't want to be unpopular. It's always politics.
NASA and the Mars Climate Orbiter. NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter was a $327 million marvel, packed with cutting-edge technology. It was launched into space, carrying the hopes of an entire federal agency.
So there's a lot of anticipation that this mission is going to succeed, get an orbit around Mars, and help us understand the global properties of that planet.
But when the orbiter reached Mars, it quickly vanished into the Martian atmosphere. Sadly, this was due to a completely avoidable error. One engineering team used imperial measurements, while another used metric. The probe, meant to orbit gently around Mars, instead plunged too low, burning up in the atmosphere. The mistake was so basic it became legend, a catastrophic failure caused by a failure to hit convert.
The difference in units meant that the rocket engines fired for too long, the braking was too hard, and the spacecraft dipped too low into the Martian upper atmosphere, and it disintegrated.
NASA overhauled its processes afterward, but the orbiter's fiery demise remains a textbook case in why the details and decimals matter. Yahoo didn't buy Google. In 1998, 2 scrappy Stanford grads offered to sell their weird little search engine to tech giant Yahoo. Their asking price was a whopping $1 million. Yahoo was unimpressed and passed. 4 years later, the new company, Google, came knocking once more. This time, having grown a bit, they asked for $5 billion. Yahoo passed again. Today, Google has a market cap over $2 trillion. Yahoo, though, is all but forgotten. At its peak, Yahoo was valued at $125 billion, but a string of missed chances and poor decisions turned it into a cautionary tale. It's hard to imagine a bigger we could have had it all moment. Yahoo didn't miss the boat so much as they gleefully set it on fire. The Orisa Famine. In 1866, the Indian province of Orisa was struck by a devastating famine. Over 1 million Indians died from starvation by its conclusion. The famine began with a monsoon devastating the rice harvest. It accelerated into a crisis thanks to British apathy and mismanagement. Colonial officials ignored early warning signs, failing to distribute food to areas in need. At the same time, the colonial project of rice exportation continued apace. When aid finally did arrive, it was too late. In some areas, a third of the population had already died. The tragedy became a symbol of how imperial mismanagement and rigid bureaucracy could turn a crisis into a catastrophe. Accidentally bombing London. It was August 24, 1940. German bombers took to the night sky, ordered to strike military targets.
After initial skirmishes over the English Channel, German airborne units began bombing the British mainland.
Something went horribly wrong. A squadron veered off course, dropping its payload, thinking it was on target. The bombs were likely meant for RAF airfields or supply depots. Instead, they fell on central London. Civilians died, and fires spread almost as fast as anti-German fury. Some historians argue it wasn't a mistake. Others say it was. Either way, the consequences were immediate. Churchill ordered raids over Berlin, piercing Hitler's illusion of invincibility.
For the first time since the beginning of the war, the Germans were made aware of their own vulnerability. Despite various blitzkrieg victories, the Luftwaffe was unable to keep enemy plane formations out.
In response, the Führer unleashed the Blitz, almost 57 nights of relentless bombing. What may have been a navigational error turned Western sentiment further against Hitler. Order number 227. By 1942, Nazi Germany had penetrated deep into Soviet territory. Desperate to stop the bleeding, and possibly fearing mass desertion, Stalin issued Order number 227, not one step back. Retreat without permission became a crime.
Soldiers of the glorious Red Army! From now on, it is either victory or death! Those who retreat will be shot!
Soldiers who fled were labeled traitors, many executed by their own side. Blocking detachments were stationed behind the front lines, ordered to shoot any who ran. The goal was discipline. The result was chaos and fear. Order number 227 was a body blow to Soviet morale.
Here the men's only choice is between German bullets and ours. But there's another way.
Hundreds were killed by their own comrades for breaking under unimaginable pressure. Instead of forging unity, the order bred distrust between officers and troops. In a war that demanded resilience, Stalin chose repression. He nearly shattered the Red Army from within. The partition of India. As World War II ended, global powers began the process of decolonization. The partition of India proved how carelessly it was all handled.
One of the largest, most ethnically diverse nations in the world has been divided. One country will now become two, India and Pakistan. As a British barrister draws a line on a map, a once peaceful land implodes.
Britain put Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who had never set foot in India, in charge of dividing 175,000 square miles of land. He was given just 5 weeks, no current maps, no updated census data, just crushing pressure from the British government. What followed was a rushed, arbitrary division that tore through whole regions and communities. When India and Pakistan were born, millions of Hindus and Muslims were suddenly on the wrong side of the border. Many of them were killed in the ensuing violence.
Partition unleashed a wave of bloodshed. One of the central flashpoints was Punjab. People who suddenly found themselves in the wrong country had to flee from their ancestral homes, on foot, on bullock carts, or by train.
What should have been a peaceful transition became one of the largest, deadliest forced migrations in history. Listening to Thomas Midgley Jr. You have probably never heard of Thomas Midgley Jr., yet this unknown American scientist may be responsible for more suffering than any other man in history. The ripples of his innovations are still being felt a century later.
But Thomas Midgley continued with his research and, within a few months, made a new discovery.
In the 1920s, he pushed for the addition of tetraethyl lead to gasoline. At the time, it was seen as a brilliant move. Lead was a cheap way to boost engine power and efficiency. Unfortunately, this decision spread one of the world's worst neurotoxins across the planet. generations of children suffered. That wasn't Midgley's only ecological sin. He later helped invent chlorofluorocarbons like Freon.
Sometimes they would say safe as milk, that it was perfect in every way and that it was a miracle chemical, and it was proof that chemistry could solve any problem that people would have.
His inventions helped to gouge massive holes in the ozone layer. Midgley was like the Johnny Appleseed of carcinogens. Mao's 4 Pests campaign. Mao Zedong was determined to free his country from disease and starvation.
Mao wanted to bring China out of its almost medieval state of underdevelopment. He launched a program of industrialization in towns and in the country, intended to take China into the promised land of the socialist paradise in less than 15 years.
To that end, he launched the 4 Pests campaign to eliminate plague-carrying and crop-eating pests. They'd eradicate mosquitoes, flies, rats, and sparrows. Citizens were told to chase sparrows from the skies, smashing nests and clanging pans until the birds dropped dead from exhaustion. The campaign was a complete success, but sparrows didn't just eat grain, they ate locusts. With their natural predators gone, locust swarms swept across China like a biblical plague.
The sparrows died of exhaustion and gave way to a new enemy: insects.
Fields across the land were stripped bare. The ecological collapse helped trigger the Great Chinese Famine. Millions starved to death. Some sources claim that China had to import sparrows from the Soviet Union to fix the error. Alexander the Great's air blunder. Alexander the Great may have conquered half the known world, but he was garbage at estate planning.
Bored with the ordinary business of policing an empire, the strain of years of leading by example was showing. After one particularly heavy drinking bout, Alexander collapsed with a fever.
In 323 BCE, as he lay dying, his generals asked who should inherit his empire. After all, he had no clear heir himself. His only son was still an infant. His reply would doom his empire, which would go, quote, to the strongest. He essentially dared his generals to do their worst, and they greedily obliged. Alexander's generals tore the empire apart with decades of war, betrayal, and fragmentation.
The generals had no one to hang on to. They weren't the statesmen that he was.
His once unified empire shattered into squabbling kingdoms. All of Alexander's dreams of a global Hellenistic superpower died with him. Morgan Stanley's losses. Wall Street spent years drunk on the profits of the subprime mortgage market. Unlike most, Morgan Stanley did anticipate the bottom falling out before the crisis hit in early 2007.
The collapse in confidence across the market left Morgan Stanley on life support, in desperate need of cash after a run on its prime brokerage, which is the unit that serves its hedge funds.
They had the golden ticket and they blew it. They took an early short position on the mortgage market, even as their colleagues called them insane. The peer pressure was too much. The firm lacked the fortitude to hold fast. They dumped their position too early, jumping back into the market with both feet. It led to a $9 billion loss, the worst in Morgan Stanley's history.
If we didn't do a deal, it was over. We couldn't stay in business.
Destroying the Library of Alexandria. The Great Library of Alexandria was the crowning achievement of ancient civilization. It was quite simply the greatest repository of human knowledge ever assembled until the modern age.
The library was renowned throughout the ancient world. 700,000 scrolls, the collected knowledge of antiquity, were stored here.
The library held hundreds of thousands of scrolls on everything from science to literature to philosophy. The history of entire civilizations was put to paper. Then it burned to the ground, though we don't know exactly when. Some blame Caesar's siege, others the Christian purges or the Muslim conquest. No matter who put the final nail in the coffin, the result was a library left in ashes.
The library and its treasures were destroyed by fire in the 3rd century AD.
The living record of human progress was destroyed. Much of its knowledge never resurfaced. The loss may have set civilization back by centuries. 3 Mile Island's cooling malfunction. It should have been routine. A stuck valve triggered an alarm at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania.
What is happening on 3 Mile Island on this March night was never adequately planned for.
The glitch could have been dealt with swiftly, but instead of containing the problem, operators made it worse. They misread the gauges and shut off the emergency cooling. This caused the reactor to overheat. Confusion spread faster than the radiation. By the time they realized the core was melting down, it was almost too late. A full catastrophe was barely avoided, but radioactive gas leaked into the air and the plant was permanently damaged. No one died, but the American public's confidence in nuclear energy was shattered.
5 frightening days in the spring of 1979. changed forever the face of nuclear power in America. They ended the nation's blind infatuation with the atomic miracle.
3 Mile Island became a symbol of how small errors and human hubris could spiral out of control. TEPCO and nuclear regulators set Fukushima up for failure. It may be hard to remember today, but the meltdown at Fukushima could have been avoided. When it went online, everyone knew it was built above a fault line.
絶対事故なんか起こりそうのない。絶対安全だから。絶対ついてました。
The company was told explicitly that while technically up to specs, it wasn't ready for a real disaster. Engineers from TEPCO even ran simulations in 2008, predicting 15-foot-high waves from a tsunami. All the warnings went unheeded. The owners of the plant dismissed concerns as unrealistic. Cut to 2011, when an earthquake caused a massive tsunami to slam into the plant.
The tsunami flooded the nuclear power plant. Result? Massive overheating, and reactors 1, 2, and 3 suffered meltdowns.
The worst nuclear catastrophe in decades never needed to have happened at all. The Hindenburg. It was sleek, majestic, and the pride of Nazi Germany's engineers.
Hindenburg provided something that no other type of aircraft could provide. 3-day passage from Europe to the United States, in great luxury.
Then, in less than a minute, the future of air travel went up in flames. As it descended over a naval station in New Jersey, the Hindenburg, a massive Zeppelin, suddenly ignited, exploding in midair in front of cameras and horrified spectators. 36 people died, and the world watched in disbelief as radio announcer Herbert Morrison's voice cracked. Oh, the humanity. The choice to fill the balloon with highly flammable hydrogen was a huge mistake. Helium was the safer choice, but U.S. export restrictions forced Germany's hand.
Miraculously, about 2/3 of the people on actually live through this disaster.
It was likely a single spark that began the conflagration. That spark ended an entire era of aviation, burning its promise out of the sky. The Peloponnesian War. It was a war that never needed to happen, and it shattered one of history's greatest civilizations. Athens and Sparta, once united against Persia, turned on each other in a decades-long struggle for dominance.
Both were proud city-states who eyed each other with great suspicion. Each was certain that it should wield supreme authority.
The Peloponnesian War drained resources, devastated cities, and left both sides too weak to recover. Athens, in a moment of hubris, launched the disastrous Sicilian expedition, losing thousands of soldiers and nearly its entire navy. In the end, Sparta may have won, but Greece as a whole lost. The war marked the end of Athens' golden age, killing the momentum of ancient democracy.
The shockwaves crashed through the city of Athens like an earthquake. Everyone knew what would happen next.
More importantly, it left Greece vulnerable to Macedonian conquest. What began as a regional rivalry became a slow-motion collapse of a civilization's potential. Federal agencies not talking leads to 9/11. In the months before 9/11, the U.S. government had most of the pieces of the puzzle. Had someone put them together, they may have prevented the attack.
The reality was that the CIA failed in its fundamental mission, which is to protect the United States with warning and with intelligence.
The CIA had tracked known al-Qaeda operatives entering the U.S. The FBI had warnings about potential domestic threats, but turf wars, outdated systems, and a culture of secrecy prevailed. Federal agencies failed to share critical intelligence with one another. The 9/11 Commission later revealed that these bureaucratic silos allowed the plot to unfold in plain sight. Agencies that were supposed to protect Americans were more concerned with guarding their own little intelligence fiefdoms than saving lives. If they had had open lines of communication, the 21st century would look quite different.
The security forces that they're facing up against in the West have gotten much more attuned to managing and responding to those threats. And so it's a much harder environment for them to try to do that. But certainly, the intent is still there.
The Banschow Dam Disaster. The Banschow Dam was meant to symbolize humanity's dominance over nature. Instead, it became one of the deadliest engineering failures in history. In 1975, Typhoon Nina dumped a year's worth of rain on Hunan province in just a few days. The dam couldn't handle it, because it was never designed to. Corners were cut, safety warnings ignored, and political pressure silenced engineers who spoke out. When the dam collapsed, it triggered a chain reaction. 61 other dams failed, unleashing a wall of water that obliterated entire towns. Over 230,000 people are estimated to have died from the flooding and its aftermath. For years, the disaster was buried under state secrecy. But the destruction and death toll were so extreme, it couldn't stay buried forever. The Exxon Valdez oil spill.
They were completely overwhelmed. Coast Guard didn't quite know what to do.
Before Deepwater Horizon, the Exxon Valdez oil spill was the largest in American history, dumping more than 10 million gallons into Alaska's Prince William Sound. But this accident is far less complex and is attributed almost entirely to human error. Shortly after midnight on March 24, 1989, the tanker ran aground on Bligh Reef, puncturing 8 of its 11 cargo holds.
When we got on the radio, he said, "Well, how big's the hole?" I said, "Well, it's big enough to drive our boat through."
At the time, Captain Joe Hazelwood was below decks, sleeping off, quote, 2 or 3 vodkas he had consumed earlier. Furthermore, the crew was overworked and exhausted, contributing to third mate Gregory Cousins driving the vessel into the reef. Part of the blame also reportedly lay on the Exxon Shipping Company for failing to maintain the ship's collision avoidance system.
You can see oil like a boiling cauldron.
Mexico attacks the Alamo.
If you could oversee manning the walls, it would be a help. We should have 6 men to a cannon, 18 tubes, which works out to
108 men.
And we should have a man with a musket every 4 feet of wall.
We're gonna need more men.
In 1836, the Texas Revolution was underway, with the Anglo-American residents of Texas fighting for independence from the Mexican Republic. They were successful, winning 10 years of independence before joining the United States in 1846. During the war, Mexican forces under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna laid siege to the Alamo.
You said you wanted to see him. There he is. The Napoleon of the West. Which one? That's Santa Anna. Yeah. He's quite the peacock, isn't he?
After 13 days, roughly 1,500 Mexican soldiers launched a decisive attack, overwhelming the garrison of about 200 Texians after 3 attempts. It was a Pyrrhic victory, though, as the merciless bloodshed inspired many to join the army, hoping to take revenge for the loss of their fellow Texians. Mere weeks later, a now fortified Texian army attacked the Mexicans by surprise in the Battle of San Jacinto, decimating them in just 18 minutes.
At this very moment, our soldiers are held in the Alamo against a force of thousands. They put their hopes in Colonel Fannin, who, despite his pedigree, has proven himself ill-equipped to lead, much less march an army. This is from Colonel Travis. I call on you in the name of liberty to come to our aid with all dispatch.
Byzantine refusal to hire Orban.
Praise to all of you, Engineer Urban.
Thank you, my Sultan.
Have a safe journey.
The Roman Empire's final 2 centuries were their most difficult. By 1452, the Ottoman Empire already had its eyes on Constantinople, which prompted Hungarian siege engineer Orban to offer his cannons to the Romans. Unfortunately, they couldn't afford his services or provide the materials needed to construct his weapons. So, Orban took his business to the Ottomans, who happily took him on.
Free from misfortune! Do not fail us in our mission! Let our courageous soldiers be victorious on the battlefield!
He crafted the Basilic, one of the largest cannons in history, requiring 90 oxen and 400 men to transport it. Its cannonballs, each weighing 1,200 pounds, devastated the Theodosian walls, which were impenetrable for about 800 years prior. The Ottoman Sultan also carried warships across the land, bypassing the harbor's Great Chain and giving them another huge advantage.
Somebody hold the rope! Tuck the ship! Come on!
Heavy submarines. Maybe they're designed to reach astonishing depths, but that's no good if your submarine is incapable of surfacing again. That's exactly what happened to the doomed Isaac Peral class of Spanish submarine when designers realized that somebody at some point had carelessly left a decimal point in the wrong place. The sub was 100 tons heavier than it should be, meaning that if it submerged, it would never be able to return to the surface. Thankfully, the sub hadn't yet been built, so the schematics were changed to make it longer and capable of supporting all that extra weight. Except then there was another problem. The sub was now too large to fit into the port where it was being constructed. New Coke. In 1985, about a century after Coca-Cola first hit shelves, Coke decided to mix things up and rework the tried and tested Coke formula.
Yeah, Coke is it. Come on, check it out now. It's got a new taste. It's a definite wow.
The result was New Coke, one of the biggest marketing fails and disasters of all time. The simple fact was that nobody really liked New Coke. Coke wanted to make its drink taste more like Pepsi, which is a little sweeter than Coke, and it was a resounding failure.
All of the taste tests said
people preferred the taste of this new product to the century-old product. What they hadn't factored in was the huge emotional attachment there was to this brand.
Though we understand trying to corner Pepsi's share of the market, consumer capitalism is about choice. Nobody wants to choose from two identical colas.
It's a Coke. Coke is it.
There was just no reason for Coke to try and destroy its own business by changing the recipe. Inaccurately describing the Zodiac Killer. The self-named Zodiac Killer held Northern California in a state of terror in the late 1960s. The serial killer taunted police by sending multiple letters and ciphers to the local press.
The killer contacts local press. He includes a strange three-part coded message, or cipher.
Zodiac eluded authorities for a year before narrowly escaping capture in 1969. After shooting San Francisco taxi driver Paul Stein, Zodiac was able to flee the scene because the physical description provided to police officers over dispatch was wrong.
That they may have said something like, the man's wearing a black jacket or black pants. And somehow the dispatcher misheard this and then repeated they were looking for a black man instead of a white man.
This mistake enabled Zodiac to walk directly by two police officers who unwittingly allowed the killer to escape. Investigators did not connect the shooting to Zodiac until the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the killer bragging about the murder and his close brush with the officers. Pickickets Charge. Confederate General Robert E. Lee made the biggest mistake of his life on July 3, 1863, when he ordered his troops to charge on Cemetery Ridge. There were several flaws in Lee's plan. Union General George G. Meade had anticipated Lee's attack on the center of his lines rather than the flanks and concentrated his defenses there.
Now Pickett gave the order. Up, men, and to your posts. Don't forget today that you are from Old Virginia.
The charge exposed Confederate soldiers to heavy artillery and rifle fire, and the Army suffered catastrophic casualties. It effectively crippled the Confederate forces at Gettysburg and forced Lee to abandon the battle and retreat from the North. With this one simple charge, the tide of the American Civil War permanently shifted, all to the detriment of Lee and his forces.
What's happening? I can't see what's happening to my boys. What's happening to my boys?
The Wangongchang explosion. Gunpowder has been used by China since the 9th century.
Early Chinese alchemists were trying to create a potion for immortality. Instead, what they created was a flammable powder that burned down many of their homes.
Despite centuries of use and refinement, Beijing officials were criminally negligent in the spring of 1626. It never seemed to occur to anyone in power that the center of a densely populated city wasn't the best choice for storing volatile materials. Late on the morning of May 30th, for reasons which remain unclear, the Wangongchang Armory exploded. Everything within 4 square kilometers was all but obliterated, and debris was launched across the length of the city. Somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 people were killed, and large swaths of the city were utterly destroyed. Kim Jong-nam goes to Tokyo Disneyland.
Why would the young dictator of North Korea want to kill his own brother? Well, to understand North Korea, you really have to think of it as being an absolute monarchy, the Kim dynasty. The dynasty was founded by Kim Il-sung after the Second World War. When the old man died in 1994, his son, Kim Jong-il, ascended the throne.
Kim Jong-nam was once the heir to the North Korean dictatorship until 2001 when he made an embarrassing attempt to visit Tokyo Disneyland. Traveling on a fake Dominican Republic passport bearing a Chinese name, Kim was arrested upon arrival in Japan and deported to China. The incident deeply embarrassed his father, Kim Jong-il, and caused him to be shunned by his family. Ultimately, his younger half-brother Kim Jong-un took over from their father. In 2017, Kim was assassinated in Malaysia, and it was later revealed that he had been a CIA informant.
Why he killed? You don't know? Because his power is not stable. Last time Kim Jong-il, his father, he never killed people. But now, I don't think so. That's why he killed all the people. He cannot trust the people, right?
He also supported reform and free market policies, which apparently contributed to him being passed over. Had he never attempted that fateful trip, perhaps North Korea's trajectory might have been different.
After Jang Sang-tae executed it, killed it, after that, 1.5 years, only one time. I saw him. I was waiting for him, but he never come. It means his situation completely changed, be dangerous, and then the suffering for the money.
Circulating inaccurate suspect sketches. It's been over 135 years since Jack the Ripper stalked the streets of London's Whitechapel district. But the infamous murderer continues to enthrall the public.
In the autumn of 1888, the East End of London lived in terror.
Beginning in August 1888, the killer claimed 5 lives in a vicious spree that is still widely discussed and debated. As publicity mounted about the killings, police struggled under mounting pressure from the press.
They were under a lot of pressure to solve these cases, identify this individual.
In an attempt to elicit help from the public, police made a critical error when they allowed the press to publish artist renderings of the killer. Unfortunately, the sketches were not based on witness descriptions. They were simply the artist's interpretation of how a deranged killer may look. The drawings resulted in a flood of useless tips, further straining the already overwhelmed detectives.
Even at the time of the murders, he was becoming mythology. And then you start getting the man with the top hat and the cape and the little bag, so he's almost being given a supervillain image that people can latch onto.
Ronald Wayne sells out.
You know that when people hear your story, they say to themselves, my gosh, $22 billion, he could have had it.
What can I say?
Hindsight is 20/20, which is why this error stings so much. Back in 1976, businessman Ronald Wayne met Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and initially thought they had something with their fledgling computer company. Wayne went in with 10% stake in Apple, but it wasn't to last. Less than 2 weeks on, and he'd lost faith, selling those shares back to the company's founders.
If I had stayed with Apple, I probably would have wound up the richest man in the cemetery.
As we all know, Apple went on to become one of the biggest companies and electronic manufacturers in the entire world, with over 1 billion active iPhones as of 2021. What we wouldn't give for a time machine to the 70s so we could invest in the Apple shares Ron Wayne gave up.
I knew exactly what would have been if I'd have stayed with the company. I would have wound up heading a very large documentation department at the back of the building, shuffling papers for the next 20 years of my life, and that was not the future that I saw for myself.
Wrong trains. We've seen submarines too big for their ports, but what about trains too wide for their platforms? That's what happened in France in 2014, when France's national rail company SNCF put in an order for 2,000 brand new trains. The trains would fit many big metropolitan stations like Paris's newer infrastructure. But in rural France, the platforms were too narrow. This all happened because somebody at the French rail network gave SNCF the wrong measurements.
The reason that they've got this problem is because RFF, which is the rail network operator, had measured platforms and stations that were built about 30 years ago, and the access between the platforms looked about right.
SNCF was left trying to secretly widen the affected stations, but eventually the error was made public. The trains themselves cost around $20 billion, and modifying the platforms has cost over $60 million.
Investors are indignant about the mistake. We refuse to pay a single cent for these repairs, said this spokesperson. We can't be taken for fools and pay for the privilege.
The Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
126 people were on board at the time of the explosion.
Some jumped more than 75 feet into the ocean.
A multitude of factors went into the Deepwater Horizon explosion and oil spill. A central mistake was the failure to correctly respond to the signs of impending disaster. Pressure tests indicated that the well was not properly sealed, but the readings were misinterpreted.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Deepwater Horizon. It's on fire. We've had a major explosion. We need assistance.
It's on fire!
This error was compounded by a rush to complete the drilling operation, driven largely by cost-cutting pressures, leading to the decision to proceed with the operation despite warning signs. The sequence of failures ultimately triggered the calamitous explosion that killed 11 people and sent 210 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico.
Meanwhile, live cameras on the ocean floor show the ferocity of the ongoing leak.
Star Wars billions. In the mid-70s, nobody knew that Star Wars was going to become one of the biggest pop culture properties in history.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Production was expensive, difficult, and ran George Lucas into the ground. Not seeing its potential, 20th Century Fox made a deal with Lucas that he'd receive the royalties from merchandise sales. What followed set a new standard for merchandisable franchises, giving Lucas a personal fortune to the tune of billions of dollars. It was a grave error on the part of Fox, and saw the studio miss out on an absolutely obscene amount of money in the decades between Star Wars release in theaters and Lucasfilms being acquired by Disney.
You have lost.
No. 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 You will die.
Angering Genghis Khan.
You still sing the same song, Temujin.
Many voices carry it now.
Not the Merkits. Outcast.
I asked for this meeting in the hope that Mongol would not shed Mongol blood. Also that you might still join with me to spread the name of the Mongol nation.
Many words can be used to describe Genghis Khan, one of history's most successful conquerors, but cool-headed isn't one of them. In less than 2 years, Genghis annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire. While there were a variety of factors that contributed to this invasion, the main one was an insult to his ambassadors.
I promise you this, Jamuga. The Merkits will ride as part of the Mongol nation, or their land will be razed to the ground. Raised so that not even a lame horse would stumble walking across it.
In 1218, the Khan sent a caravan to the empire, who were arrested and executed on suspicion of being spies. When Genghis sent diplomats to deal with the situation, the Khwarezmians refused to comply and beheaded the chief envoy. By 1221, their empire was shattered, and they had suffered somewhere between 2 and 15 million casualties. Maybe think twice before you insult one of history's most ambitious conquerors.
I've lived to see it. That the tribes come together as one people. But it is my sons who will make our nation great.
Napoleon invades Russia.
I must wipe away my melancholy and begin the march to Moscow. I've convinced the heads of Europe of this resolution, and so I command the combined forces of France, Austria, Italy, Germany, and Poland. I see nothing but success in my future.
In 1812, Napoleon famously declared war on Russia, citing their refusal to comply with the continental system. He brought around 500,000 soldiers from all across Europe to the border and proceeded to march them to Moscow. The Russian defense was confused with no planned resistance, with their eventual scorched earth tactic being largely improvised.
I'm writing to you because I've just won a great battle today. Tomorrow we will resume our advance. Moscow is now only 200 miles away, and I think of you all the while. All yours.
At the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon abandoned his usual cunning tactics and ordered a direct assault instead. The French won and Moscow was taken, but Little Boney never received the peace deal he expected. Eventually, winter took hold, and Napoleon embarked upon one of history's most disastrous retreats, costing him his army and ultimately his empire.
Fortune has abandoned me. I know that it is what fate has for me. Your words rattle in my head. I am nothing without you.
Forgetting about time zones hamstrung the Bay of Pigs invasion. During the Cold War, the US backed numerous coups d'etat around the world. While several of these succeeded in installing new regimes, attempts in Cuba failed spectacularly. Worried about Prime Minister Fidel Castro's communist policies, in 1961, the CIA orchestrated the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion, landing Cuban counter-revolutionaries on the country's southwestern coast. However, an obvious paint job on a B-26 bomber, disguised to look Cuban, gave away U.S. involvement to the world, leading President Kennedy to pull back air support. A few days later, a last-ditch bombing raid flying out of Nicaragua was botched when bombers were caught without their escort of fighter jets. Embarrassingly, someone had forgotten the 1-hour difference between Nicaragua and Cuba, the Cedar Fire.
It's gigantic. You never imagine it's as big as that. Until it happens.
Imagine accidentally starting a fire that burns over 270,000 acres of land and kills 15 people. The guilt would be unimaginable. Sergio Martinez was a novice hunter who got lost in the Cuyamaca Mountains of Southern California in October 2003 and started a fire to signal potential rescuers.
Afraid he was going to die in the wilderness, he finally set a signal fire which got out of control.
But the flames quickly spread to the nearby chaparral, and he lost control of the fire. The low humidity and Santa Ana winds exacerbated the destruction, and the fire burned through 273,000 acres of San Diego County. Nearly 3,000 buildings were destroyed and 15 people lost their lives. Martinez was given 5 years probation and 960 hours of community service.
If you take a look down Fairbrook here, Fairbrook Place, this is just something you probably see in a movie. That's the only way to describe it.
Attempting to force a confession. The grisly 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short is one of the most notorious cold cases in American history. Dubbed the Black Dahlia by the media because of her dark hair and affinity for black clothing, Short was a young, aspiring actress.
She was a young woman who left her home to come find fame and fortune, maybe, in Los Angeles.
The case was heavily publicized. By most accounts, the LAPD put extensive effort into solving the case, conducting numerous interviews and identifying multiple suspects. However, they faced intense public pressure to capture the killer.
Police and reporters try to get a lead on Beth's life, but the more they dig in, the more of a mystery she becomes.
When they narrowed in on Leslie Dillon, investigators were certain he was responsible. Trying to force a confession from Dillon, the LAPD's gangster squad illegally detained him. In response, Dillon filed a lawsuit against the department. The case ultimately landed in front of a grand jury and then went cold.
The Elizabeth Short mystery carries on to this day because nobody's been caught.
Quaker buys Snapple. In the early 90s, Snapple was only on the up. It had a few high-profile ad campaigns that meant it was able to hold its own in the competitive world of juice and soft drinks, making it look like a promising investment opportunity for Quaker Oats.
Quaker Oats doesn't come with prizes. But there's something in this box that I think is really worth prizing.
Unfortunately, things did not go to plan. Though Quaker Oats spent $1.7 billion on a deal it thought was a sure thing, after only 3 years, Snapple was sold off again so that Quaker Oats could lick its wounds for a meager $300 million.
Here's some iced tea to pass the time, but remember, nothing takes the place of a good education.
Perhaps a little embarrassingly, Snapple is still going strong. It seems that separating was the best thing for both of these brands.
Snapple, made from the best stuff on earth.
The 2024 CrowdStrike incident.
It's hit transport with air passengers and their luggage having to be manually processed, delaying flights. Trains have also been affected.
Before July 19, 2024, few people had ever heard of CrowdStrike. It's amazing how much damage just one day can do. CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company based out of Austin, Texas that caused about $10 billion in damage on the morning of July 19th. CrowdStrike made an update to its Falcon sensor software, but a bug caused the software to crash.
Officials in Europe were already getting a grasp on how bad the issue was. Germany's cybersecurity chief warned people it would be a long day.
Systems running Microsoft Windows crashed, resulting in the largest outage in world history. The results were devastating and disrupted nearly all aspects of daily life, upending banks, hospitals, air transport, and retail. It just goes to show how fragile our tech-heavy existence truly is.
Ambulance services across the country have reported a surge in demand as a result.
But if you have an urgent problem, you should contact your own GP surgery, either in person or by telephone.
Prematurely clearing the fire site. In the 1970s, Luna Park, Sydney was one of Australia's most popular amusement parks. A top attraction in the park was the Ghost Train. The disorienting ride took passengers through a dark, winding tunnel full of spine-chilling special effects. Night after night, park-goers enjoyed the thrilling ride. But on June 9, 1979, something went terribly wrong. Multiple people noticed an odd smell and what looked like real fire.
We decided to have a second go in the Ghost Train. And as we're in there, I could distinctly smell the kerosene burning.
Soon, flames enveloped the ride, trapping several passengers inside. 7 people perished. The exact cause was unclear. However, the lead investigator quickly ruled out arson and concluded faulty wiring was to blame.
But within just half a day, the police hastily wrote the fire off as an electrical fault and bulldozed the scene.
The scene was cleared, leaving many questions unanswered and obliterating any chance of further investigation. Official handling of the case has been heavily criticized.
There was so much buried, so many facts distorted and hidden.
America escalating tensions in Vietnam.
It was a serious mistake for Kennedy to get involved, as he did, with American force in that part of the world thinking that this great monolithic Soviet-style communism would rule the roost when he could have played it differently, I believe, and fought it more subtly.
The United States entered the Vietnam War following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where North Vietnamese forces allegedly attacked the U.S. Navy in international waters. The event was framed as an unprovoked attack, but later evidence showed otherwise.
The great word of the Vietnam War gave us was escalation, because it starts off with Kennedy sending in just 400 military advisors who are actually special forces, organizing and controlling the action, and then more go in.
While the first attack remains debated, the second one was entirely fabricated. It devolved into a brutal war, which dragged on for years, causing thousands of American and Vietnamese deaths. Along the way, the United States committed atrocious war crimes, such as the My Lai massacre. Ultimately, the war ended in failure, all spurred on by an incident with very little evidence.
He should have fought it with the limited aid he gave initially, with the development of the special forces, the Green Berets as they're called, and other small tactical units, and not created this great surge of North Vietnamese resentment.
Republics falling to tyranny. Democratic institutions are only as strong as a nation's willingness to keep it afloat. Instability and internal strife work hand in hand to bring democracies to their knees. The Roman and Weimar republics each struggled with political polarization, economic crises, and corruption. Discontent and distrust in institutions spread like viruses, weaponized by ambitious authoritarians. The Roman Republic's decline was marked by social unrest and economic inequality. Elites struggled for power. Amidst the chaos, Julius Caesar rose quickly and eventually established imperial rule. Likewise, the Weimar Republic was strangled by hyperinflation and factionalism.
From 620,000 marks to the dollar in August 1923 to 630 billion 3 months later.
Political extremists took advantage of the uncertainty and eventually seized power. In the end, Adolf Hitler rose to prominence, dominating both Germany and most of Europe. Russia invades Ukraine. 8 years after annexing Crimea in 2014, Russia followed up with a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin expected the war to end in a matter of days or hours. Instead, as of 2025, it is still dragging on. The death toll of Russian troops is staggering. Some estimates suggest that more than 100,000 soldiers have been killed.
Many of the casualties are now older fighters with little or no training. Significant numbers have also been recruited from prisons.
The attrition rate has forced Russia to conscript new fodder for the war machine. Economically, Russia faces severe sanctions and a crippling recession. Russia has been forced to seek economic aid and military armament from China and North Korea. Western aid to Ukraine has allowed their military in 2024 to launch the first significant military incursion into Russian territory since World War II.
Video shows a Ukrainian soldier driving through the bombed-out Russian countryside unchallenged, then celebrating driving back a Russian tank.
The attacks that created empires.
Though the raid only lasted 75 minutes, the Japanese destroyed or damaged nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and more than 340 airplanes.
Attacking first has often determined the outcome of a war. Some of those outcomes, though, were not so rosy for the attackers. In 1588, Spain's Armada set out to crush England's growing navy and restore Catholic rule, only to be slammed by powerful storms. Decimated, the survivors were ultimately outmaneuvered by England's smaller ships.
It's a sea battle that changed the balance of world power for 300 years.
Spain's attack led to England's centuries-long dominance over the seas. In 1941, Japan too sought to hamstring their naval rival. Their attack on Pearl Harbor was swift and devastating. It did not, however, deliver a crippling blow to the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Instead, it galvanized America, dragging it into World War II.
On December 8, 1941, one day after the attack, the United States Congress declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II.
In each instance, the attacked nation went on to become the world's most formidable superpower. Titanic sinks after iceberg warnings are ignored.
Why are they turning? Is it hard over? It is, yes, sir, hard over.
Many mistakes were made that caused the Titanic to sink, so it's difficult to pinpoint just one. Perhaps the most consequential, though, was turning hard to starboard when they spotted the iceberg, which extended the collision, creating a large gash that flooded 5 compartments. Had they struck the iceberg head-on, the bow would have been crushed, but only 1 or 2 compartments would have flooded.
Note the time, enter it in the log.
What was that, Mr. Murdoch?
An iceberg, sir. I put her hard to starboard and ran the engines full of stern, but it was too close. I tried to port round it, but she hit.
In such an event, the ship could have survived, as it was built to still float with up to 4 flooded compartments. Also, it only carried 20 lifeboats, enough for about half its passengers. The primary mistake that night was ignoring iceberg warnings and maintaining a high speed throughout. Changing just this one decision could likely have prevented the accident.
The pumps. If we open the doors...
The pumps buy you time, but minutes only. From this moment, no matter what we do, Titanic will founder.
Hitler's invasion of Russia. A British soldier's choice to spare the future Führer's life during World War I turned out to be a huge blunder. But we'd argue that the most dramatic mistake involving Adolf Hitler was one he made himself. Despite signing a non-aggression pact with Russia, Hitler still considered Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union his enemies. In June of 1941, the Germans invaded Russia. Despite committing the largest invasion force in history, the Germans were unprepared for the Soviet scorched earth tactics or the bleak Russian winter, and they experienced over 500,000 casualties. The offensive split and depleted the German forces, and put Russia on the side of the Allies, which likely lost Hitler the war. Treaty of Versailles harsh terms.
If you think of September the 11th, but then you think of September the 11th style casualties every day for 4 years, then you begin to get some kind of feeling of what the sort of trauma was that existed in the Western countries and the Allied countries at the time, particularly in Britain and in France, which had never known levels of casualties of the kind that they'd experienced between 1914 and 1918.
The Treaty of Versailles was a deal signed in 1919 at the end of World War I, which mainly focused on weakening the German Empire. Despite the Austrian-Hungarian Empire being the main instigators, the victorious powers primarily blamed Germany.
We were journeying to Paris, not merely to liquidate the war, but to found a new order in Europe. We were preparing not peace only, but eternal peace. There was about us the halo of some divine mission. We must be alert, stern, righteous, and ascetic, for we were bent on doing great, permanent, and noble things.
They had to accept full responsibility for starting the war, and were made to pay enormous reparations. This crippled their economy, and fostered resentment towards the victorious powers, which eventually led to Hitler's rise to power and World War II. If the Allies had adopted a less punitive approach, like the US did to Japan after World War II, the devastating Second War and the rise of Nazi Germany might have been alternate history.
For 6 months, it was the closest we have ever had to a world government, and I don't suspect we'll ever have anything like it again. You can imagine all the most powerful people in the world here, prime ministers, kings, presidents, foreign secretaries, plus all the people who came because they were here.
Mao's great leap forward.
I saw Russian cars, which the Chinese have begun to make. There were wood-burning buses of the type I had seen in Europe during the war. Vehicles of all kinds. In most places of the city, there was a good traffic control system.
Mao Zedong was the founder of Communist China, who became leader of the CCP during the Long March, a pivotal event in the Second Sino-Japanese War. After Japan's defeat, he sought to industrialize China and finally recover from the century of humiliation. He believed rapid industrialization would help them catch up to the West, but it turned into a catastrophic failure.
Here, oil is extracted from coal. Built in 1928 by the Japanese, destroyed during the war, it was restored and enlarged. The Japanese produced 225,000 tons of petroleum in their best year. 1957 production was 320,000 tons. 1958 goal, 440,000 to catch up with Britain.
The plan was overly optimistic and resulted in mass famine and an economic collapse. By 1962, Mao faced criticism for his policies and was sidelined at the 7,000 Cadres Conference. This didn't last long, though, as just 4 years later, he kickstarted the Cultural Revolution, which allowed him to reclaim full control of the nation.
Coal comes from the Fukushima mines. The plant also has its own department store, canteen, and club. Built during the Japanese occupation, The plant has been restored and enlarged following wartime destruction. All kinds of steel products are made.
The American invasion of Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq was driven by the deadly combination of misleading claims and poor assumptions. The U.S. government convinced their allies that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and had links to terrorism.
There was no link between 9/11 and Iraq, so the Bush administration began manufacturing justifications.
The Bush administration's assertions were later proven false. No WMDs were ever found, nor was any evidence linking Iraq to al-Qaeda. By some estimates, the invasion led to over 1 million deaths and casualties, as well as widespread destruction and regional instability. The U.S. invasion also ultimately played a crucial role in the rise of ISIS. The economic cost to Americans is hard to pin down, though some experts believe that the war cost taxpayers between $1 and $2 trillion.
It changed the entire Middle East. In fact, it changed much of our world forever.
Caesar ignores warnings.
Senator Verinas, I come about your grandson, Lucius. And what I tell you now is the truth.
Julius Caesar is most famous for sowing the seeds of the Roman Empire, enslaving and slaughtering millions of Gauls, and giving the month of July its name. He was eventually assassinated in 44 BC, which shouldn't have come as a surprise since he was given several warnings about it.
If I may, gracious Caesar, you were going to consider revoking my brother's exile.
I'm still considering it. Take your hand off me.
What are you waiting for? No! No! No!
All of these were dismissed, leading to his death in the Senate, where he was stabbed 23 times. A soothsayer warned him to beware the Ides of March, the eventual date he was killed. His wife Calpurnia had a dream of his death and insisted he stay home, but he dismissed her fears. Ultimately, his trusted friend Brutus convinced him to come in, which turned out to be the dictator's final mistake.
So you see, the tyrant is dead, the Republic is restored, and you are alone. Would you like some honey water? I won't. Thank you.
AOL buys Time Warner.
What you will come to know, as we know instinctively, that there is a natural fit between these two companies.
In the year 2000, the dot-com bubble was at its height, and it didn't look like anything would slow down the meteoric rise of the internet.
Well, pretty clearly, if you looked at last Friday, the market cap of AOL was twice the size of Time Warner. I have made a judgment, which I believe to be correct, that going forward, the Time Warner shareholders will be much better off owning 45% of AOL Time Warner than 100% of Time Warner.
Ultimately, the internet's development didn't slow down, but the stock market did, leading to a recession. One of the biggest casualties was the merger of AOL and Time Warner in 2000, which even at the time was viewed by many as being a ridiculous idea.
But things didn't turn out as planned. From the very beginning, the merged company failed to live up to its lofty financial expectations. To make matters worse, technology stocks that had been thriving in the 90s suddenly fell off a cliff with the burst of the internet bubble.
AOL spent a whopping $182 billion on merging with Time Warner, but years on, the company split again. Today, Time Warner remains a major player in the media business, and while AOL still exists, it's dead in the water. Oh, how the tables turned.
Is that the biggest regret of your life?
What?
Having all your money tied up in Time Warner.
No, I would have liked to see that merger not happen.
NASA ignores Challenger warnings.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
In 1986, NASA launched the shuttle Challenger, which tragically exploded only 73 seconds after liftoff. The event occurred during a cold morning, which caused the ship's rubber O-rings to stiffen, leading to a fuel leak that ignited the vessel. All 7 crew members perished, marking one of the darkest moments in the history of space exploration.
Engines at 65%.
95%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Months earlier, several engineers, including Roger Beaujolais, had warned of an impending failure due to the O-ring's vulnerability to cold. Beaujolais even wrote a memo outlining this issue, but his concerns were completely ignored. Although a team was formed to address the problem, they lacked adequate support, and the launch proceeded, only to end disastrously, like Beaujolais predicted. Moctezuma II welcomes the Spanish.
Cortez's legacy is a complex one. On one hand, he is the conqueror of Mexico. He brought and extended the Spanish Empire. But from the indigenous point of view, he was a mass murderer.
Moctezuma II, the Aztec emperor, received Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors in 1519 with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. According to some historians, Moctezuma, influenced by a prophecy suggesting that a god would return in the form of a pale-skinned man, initially saw the Spaniards as divine. Cortés, he thought, could be the incarnation of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. He sought to appease them by offering gifts and hospitality, believing this would prevent conflict.
Cortés was motivated by these treasures and continued towards the city. He later wrote, Moctezuma came to greet us, and with him some 200 lords, all barefoot and dressed in a different costume.
Instead, his decision invited invasion. Cortés and his men exploited Moctezuma's hospitality to gather intelligence, gain political leverage, and incite dissent among the Aztecs. The Spaniards spread disease and formed alliances with rivals to the Aztecs.
This alliance would be crucial for Cortés, as the Tlaxcalteca helped him navigate the landscape, served as translators, and urged the defeat of Moctezuma.
Combined with their superior weaponry, they easily conquered the Aztec Empire completely by 1521. A B-Day helped lose D-Day. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched an ambitious operation to retake Western Europe. Known as D-Day, the first landings occurred on the beaches of Normandy, France. The casualties were high, but the operation granted the Allies a foothold that would eventually lead to victory on the Western Front. However, things could have gone very differently. The Germans' most accomplished general, Erwin Rommel, was in charge of defending the Atlantic Wall against an invasion. However, he had decided to take leave, as the 6th was his wife's birthday. And German meteorologists had mistakenly predicted storms for another few weeks, making a seaborne invasion unlikely. Had Rommel been in command, the Allies may never have gotten a beachhead to retake France, failing to secure Jean-Benet Ramsey's crime scene. On Christmas Day 1996, Jean-Benet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado.
We were kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on. Are you Nancy Ramsey? I'm the mother.
The case sparked a media frenzy and generated worldwide attention. For decades, investigators and amateur sleuths have tried to unravel the mystery of who killed the child beauty queen. Unfortunately, the initial investigation is riddled with errors. The most critical mistake occurred as soon as the police arrived. They failed to secure the crime scene.
The police should have secured that scene by telling everybody, get out. I'm sorry, this is a crime scene.
Police also neglected to take statements from Jean-Benet's parents right away, even though they were behaving in a manner the officers considered unusual.
They didn't want to talk to the police. They lawyered up right away.
The Ramseys agreed to give handwriting, hair, and blood samples. Still, they refused formal interviews with the police.
A series of additional mistakes followed. The Boulder police acknowledged these early errors. However, the investigation suffered as a result, and the case remains unsolved. The Tenerife airport disaster.
Look at it out there. I mean, this cloud just rolled right onto us. I don't think anybody has the minimums now.
This disaster on Spain's Canary Islands in March 1977 remains the deadliest accident in aviation history, costing 583 lives. Los Rodeos airport was congested due to a bomb explosion at Gran Canaria. Exacerbating this was a dense fog rolling into the airport. KLM Flight 4805 took off in the fog and crashed into Pan Am Flight 1736, which was still taxiing on the runway.
It feels great to be alive. I'd be lying if I said anything else.
An investigation found that the accident resulted from critical miscommunication between KLM captain Jakob Feldhausen von Santen and air traffic control. Ambiguous and non-standard wording led Feldhausen von Santen to commence takeoff without proper clearance, resulting in the tragic collision.
When I got out on the ground, I could hear people screaming and yelling and all. Within about 5 minutes, you heard absolutely nothing. There was no noise at all.
Russia sold Alaska. During the 19th century, the Crimean War caused several countries to begin exerting pressure on Russia through blockades of their sea routes. Because of this, they were unable to properly supply their largest overseas territory, Alaska. To offset this, in 1867, Russia sold the territory to the United States for $7.2 million. While it may have been a smart move at the time for Russia, in retrospect, it's often seen as a mistake, as the gold and oil discovered in Alaska far exceeds the value it sold for. Not only that, but Russia having a foothold in the North American continent would have caused the Cold War to play out very differently. Rushed engineering collapsing dams. If history has taught us anything, it's that greed and hubris are often at the heart of human tragedies. The Johnstown flood, St. Francis Dam failure, and Banschow Dam disaster were a trio of foreseeable catastrophes.
With every passing minute, the internal stresses on the dam were multiplying. At around 11:20 p.m., the structure finally began to give way.
In each case, flawed engineering, poor oversight, and disregard for safety warnings set the stage for massive loss of life. The Johnstown flood occurred when a poorly maintained dam collapsed, destroying entire towns.
And water is such a powerful force, it would pick up locomotives off of the track that were in this flood's way and bulldoze everything that was in its way.
Similarly, the St. Francis Dam in California failed due to structural flaws, flooding communities downstream. As discussed earlier, the Banschow Dam was overwhelmed by unprecedented rainfall. This exacerbated problems stemming from design failures and political mismanagement, causing the dam to collapse, killing thousands. Though decades apart, these disasters highlight the repeated risk of underestimating nature's power. A mistranslation may have caused America's nuclear attacks.
The U.S. had a choice: an invasion of Japan requiring 1 million troops or a top-secret weapon. The Japanese were given an ultimatum: surrender or suffer dire consequences.
After the fall of Hitler's Germany, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The declaration came with a warning: refusal would result in, quote, prompt and utter destruction. The culture of Imperial Japan couldn't tolerate public consideration of surrender. They responded with a statement including the word mokusatsu. The Allies interpreted this as an outright rejection of the Potsdam Declaration. Mokusatsu, they believed, meant to ignore with silent contempt. They acted accordingly, dropping 2 nuclear bombs.
When we came back after the surrender, we came back to the same area, and the whole city was completely flat. It was really devastating to see.
However, some believe Foreign Minister Togo was counseling circumspection and patience. He hoped that the Soviets would mediate a better deal. In the years after the nuclear attack on Japan, people have argued that by mokusatsu, Japanese leaders just meant, quote, withholding comment.
Truman claimed he never lost a night of sleep over his decision, and to this day the United States has never apologized for it. Still, the horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki firmly cemented atomic bombs as the world's weapons of absolute last resort.
The Great Depression and the Great Recession. Time and time again, America and the world pay the price for a cycle of laissez-faire economics and deregulation. In the 1920s, minimal government oversight allowed for rampant speculation and risky investments in the stock market. By the end of the decade, the stock market crashed and spread economic devastation around the world.
Wherever you looked, boys and girls were, men and women, were wondering what was ever going to happen to them.
Similarly, in the early 2000s, decades of financial deregulation enabled irresponsible lending practices. The housing market was utterly poisoned by subprime mortgages, leading to a bubble that burst in 2008.
The Federal Reserve has moved quickly to bring order to the financial markets.
Both crises were fueled by the belief that markets could self-regulate. Unchecked greed and the erosion of safeguards created systemic risks. The resultant unemployment, widespread foreclosures, and economic collapse reflected the dangers of prioritizing short-term profits over long-term stability. The Salem witch trials and the Second Red Scare. Democracy may be a net good, but majoritarianism, if left unchecked and under the right circumstances, can cause mass hysteria.
There were witchcraft outbreaks all the time, all through the colonies. colonies, especially the northern colonies.
With a dash of fear and a pinch of paranoia, bad actors could use a desire to root out perceived threats to cause great harm. In Salem, Massachusetts, accusations of witchcraft spiraled out of control. Witch trials led to executions based on flimsy evidence and fear of the supernatural.
Angry community members in Salem pointed fingers at assertive middle-aged women, but also began to accuse married women from well-respected families. Some men, and even a 4-year-old child, were also accused of being witches.
Centuries later, Senator Joe McCarthy spearheaded his own witch hunt, this time for communists. Those accused of subversion were blacklisted and persecuted, often without real evidence.
The Second Red Scare perhaps took its greatest toll on artists and entertainers, people like Paul Robeson, Arthur Miller, and others who were unable to work because of being branded as suspected communists.
In both cases, authorities used public fear to conduct aggressive and unjust campaigns against alleged enemies, ruining lives in the process and fostering deep societal distrust. Stalin's terror famine.
In terms of ruthlessness, bloodlust, Stalin remains one of the greatest villains of the 20th century.
To this day, the Holodomor is considered one of the greatest tragedies of Ukrainian history.
A term meaning death by starvation. It was genocide.
From 1932 to 1933, Joseph Stalin pushed a brutal campaign of forced collectivization and grain requisitioning in Soviet Ukraine. Unfortunately, the country was already in the middle of a food shortage, exacerbated by Stalin's policies.
Records show the Soviets took over 4 million tons of grain from Ukraine alone in 1932. That same year, a new law punished anyone who took even a handful of grain or was caught hiding grain or bread with 10 years in prison or the death penalty.
As a result, Ukraine fell into a terrible famine. By the end of 1933, somewhere between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians perished due to hunger and related diseases.
In the fall and winter of 1932, Soviet police began seizing not just grain, but anything edible, even livestock.
Stalin refused to provide aid, although Russia continued to export grain. The Holodomor devastated Ukrainian agriculture and local economies, ripping families to pieces and traumatizing a nation. Apollo 13.
Houston, we have a problem.
The basis of a blockbuster movie starring Tom Hanks, Apollo 13 was destined for the moon in 1970, but it never made it.
It was plagued by bad omens and bad luck from the very beginning.
Thankfully, unlike many other space failures like the high-profile Challenger and Columbia disasters in 1986 and 2003 respectively, the astronauts in Apollo 13 all survived. The problem was that an oxygen tank had been damaged long before its installation in the spacecraft, which was described as a, quote, bomb by Commander Jim Lovell.
I looked at my companions and I said, you know, every flight has a crisis. Something always goes wrong. This happened early in the flight, and we're now free and clear of any other things going wrong.
That bomb went off, severely damaging the craft when it was already in space. The crew had to move into the lunar module so they would survive, and then loop around the moon to return to Earth. Trojans bring in the horse.
What is this? An offering to Poseidon. The Greeks are praying for a safe return home. This is a gift. We should take it to the temple of Poseidon.
I think we should burn it. Burn it, my prince. It's a gift to the god.
This was a mistake so monumental it became a metaphor for deception that is still widely used today. The ancient city of Troy was first destroyed around 1200 BC, and again by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century. According to legend, the Greeks built a giant wooden horse, hid soldiers in it, and presented it to the Trojans as a gift.
Helen, we must go. Where? I'll show you. Now, hurry. Paris. It's a long way, quick. We must go now.
Believing it to be a symbol of victory, the Trojans brought it into their city, only for Greek soldiers to emerge and decimate Troy. The tale's authenticity remains heavily debated, with no direct evidence. However, oral history played a central role in the ancient world, which preserved surprisingly truthful elements, suggesting that this tale may have been inspired by real-life events.
Let Troy burn! Burn it! Burn it all! Burn Troy!
Pandemic response.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to grow. So are the parallels being drawn between it
and another deadly virus that struck the globe more than a century ago.
Human civilization has been ravaged by deadly pandemics over and over throughout history. The Spanish flu and COVID-19 happened a century apart, but it seems that not everyone chose to learn from the past. Discontent with public health measures spread widely during each pandemic, exacerbating the situation.
Spirits will not die, and I tell you what, we will not comply!
Governments implemented shutdowns to curb the spread, but uneven compliance and politicized responses prolonged the crises. During the Spanish flu, anti-mask leagues and public pushback against restrictions mirrored the protests and skepticism surrounding COVID-19 measures. The Spanish flu eventually subsided as the virus mutated into less lethal strains, whereas COVID-19's global impact was mitigated by vaccines and evolving public health strategies. A wrong turn started World War I. One of the most famous killings of all time. The assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand is usually credited with being the catalyst for World War I. But what some may not know is that it could have been avoided, if not for a wrong turn. The Archduke had already survived one assassination attempt with a bomb by the same group while visiting Sarajevo. On the return journey, the Archduke's drivers, who spoke Czech, couldn't understand their directions for a new route and took a wrong turn. When they stopped to reorient, it was right next to one of the assassins, who promptly pulled out a gun and shot both Ferdinand and his wife. Human atrocities.
For 100 days in 1994, the African country of Rwanda suffered a horrific campaign of mass murder.
The Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide shared chilling similarities in both their origins and outcomes. Both were driven by deeply ingrained ethnic hatred, propaganda, and political manipulation.
When out in public, Jews were ordered to wear a yellow star, a Jewish religious symbol, so that they could be easily told apart from non-Jews. The Nazis told Germans that those wearing the star were enemies of the people.
The Nazis systematically dehumanized Jews through years of anti-Semitic rhetoric. Eventually, they industrialized their bigotry, killing upwards of 12 million people, half of them Jewish. In Rwanda, the Tutsi minority was demonized by extremist Hutu leaders. After riling up that hatred to a fever pitch, the killing began. In just 100 days, Hutus slaughtered more than 500,000 Tutsis.
Tutsi victims sought refuge at churches and schools, where they hoped international organizations would protect them. But no outside party came to their aid.
Both genocides were marked by the use of state machinery to orchestrate mass murder, while other nations stood by, either complicit or indifferent. Both massacres left profound scars and a haunting legacy of loss. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died.
Chernobyl's meltdown was the most destructive nuclear disaster in history and could have been completely avoided if the proper procedures were followed. The disaster was immediately caused by a safety test, which was meant to be carried out during the day with a trained crew. Instead, the untrained night crew did the test, with very little time to prepare and properly carry it out.
The TMI accident was nothing compared with this. I would speculate that it was very serious, and the reason for that is that they've observed radiation levels 10 times normal from Finland all the way down to Stockholm.
The Soviets were also secret about their nuclear technology, withholding important information from operators and engineers who should have understood them. After the explosion, further mistakes were made, like the nearby town of Pripyat not being evacuated until over a full day later. It was the perfect storm of mistakes, leading to one of humanity's worst disasters.
You can be sure that the decision to disclose was made at the very highest level, undoubtedly by Gorbachev himself, and probably it took several days for the Soviet leaders to decide how to handle it.
What do you think was the most impactful mistake a human ever made? Let us know in the comments below.
He'd rather burn his own city than negotiate with me. I didn't think he had the courage.
Have we left any of history's greatest blunders off our list? Let us know in the comments below.
Clear out, there were two hard drives like this, just loose in the drawer. It turns out I threw the wrong one away.